Have you ever been in a thought spiral that you absolutely can't control and it just gets bigger and bigger until the overwhelm and drama drives you to do things you absolutely regret? Well, that's exactly where I found myself very recently. And now that I'm on the other side of it, for the most part, I thought I would take you behind the scenes of my thought spiral and break down why this happens to ADHDers, what we have a tendency to do that makes it worse, and what to do instead. So by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how to get yourself out of that headspin the next time it happens to you. But of course, if you're new here, my name is Karen McGill. I'm an ADHD coach and creator, and I'm here for the busy, ambitious brains who love doing things, but they tend to get in their heads, and it's a tornado up there. I know you know what I'm talking about. So let's get into it. So first, let me differentiate how an ADHD thought spiral might look a little different than a neurotypical. We'll both start off with like a big emotion or idea in our mind that completely takes over our brain, right? And then the amygdala kicks in, that's the fear center in the brain, and all of a sudden we're in reactive mode, right? It's at this point where things start to get a little neurospicy because the neurotypical person, assuming they have decent self-regulation, will be able to pause and think about a reaction before they actually go ahead and react. An ADHD'er who is in a big emotion doesn't necessarily have that pause button. Because our brains are hyperactive or inattentive, our thoughts are over here going a mile a minute. So when we're driven by impulse, if we don't take that pause to check in with our thoughts, then we're going to immediately react and then probably regret whatever behavior we have. And even if we do take that pause, if we're in the middle of a thought tornado, good luck trying to think about the next best action before you actually react. So that is why we have a tendency to act and react impulsively rather than taking that quick pause to rethink whether or not you should actually say something with your outside voice. Add to that, imagine ADHD is like having 100 different tabs open in your browser. So we're constantly bouncing from idea to idea. And then add to that, our brains are also wired to make pattern connections and think divergently about ideas. So as we're having all of these thoughts, we're also making connections and coming up with new thoughts, which then turns into this gigantic tornado of all the thoughts, all the things, and then not having the executive function skills to organize and prioritize those thoughts in a way that would actually make sense to follow through on things. So that is what we're struggling with when we get into these thought tornadoes, which could explain why we're exhausted all the time, just saying. So generally when we get into these thought spirals, it's because something's gone wrong. There's a problem, right? All of a sudden we have all of the thoughts and we want to do all of the things, so we're like up in our head about the problem. And we get so up in our head that we're not even really clear what the actual core problem is. You know, we've blown it up, we've catastrophized it. It becomes this big scary thing that we'll never be able to solve, which is why we go into the thought spiral. Because if we're not in the thought spiral, then we have to sit in the discomfort of the problem and try to figure it out. And that is like sitting on the wrong side of Velcro. And then if your brain is anything like mine, your amygdala starts looking for shiny new distractions to take you away from the problem. It just wants to keep you safe, remember. So it might entice you to buy something or go after something, commit to something, or just blow up your current life and start from scratch. I speak from experience here. What's happening at the 10,000 foot view here is that you're going through life and you hit a few bumps, your brain perceives it as a problem and it freaks out because it doesn't think it knows how to get through the problem. So all of a sudden, the only thing it wants you to do is start doing something new and getting as far away from this thing over here as humanly possible. And this thing over here could be a degree, a job, a marriage, it can be anything. But all of a sudden, we have this urge to drop it like a hot potato because our amygdala doesn't know what to do with it. Does anybody else resonate with this storyline? I know I'm not the only one that goes through this. So let me give you an example of this from my own life this year. As I'm recording this, we are in the middle of Q4. And if I'm being completely honest, I am not entirely sure what I'm doing in my business right now. And if I'm being even more honest, I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing in my business for the rest of next year. And the reason for that is that at the beginning of this year, I knew that my husband and I were going to be doing a lot of travel. So I thought to myself, I'm not going to think about Q4 or 2025. I'm going to go on these vacations. And I had these images of me walking down the beach, having these clarifying conversations in my head about everything I was going to do in Q4 and the long-term strategy of my business. I don't know about you, but I have this belief that if I go on vacation, I'll be able to solve all the problems in my life. And it's never like that. And actually, there's a good reason for that. ADHD is a thinking impairment. So most of us struggle to organize thoughts in our head and actually come up with solutions in our mind. We either have to talk things out or write things out or do something to process our ideas. We need structure and a framework, not only to organize our thoughts, but also to take the emotion out of our thoughts so that our amygdala doesn't like hijack our plans and go off to the races with another thought spiral. So that brings us to about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, where I come back from vacation and I have absolutely no plan for this quarter. I have no idea what I'm doing. And the more I think about it, the more this thought spiral starts to rise, right? And it becomes this big emotion of, I don't know what I'm doing. My business is going to fail. I'm not going to reach any of my goals. I'm a complete failure. And my brain immediately starts looking for solutions, right? Which is either burning my business down to the ground, which I don't want to do, or going to find quick fix solutions. So all of a sudden, I find myself in this very familiar pattern. I'm signing up for business courses and memberships, and I'm looking at this high price mastermind and thinking this is going to be the answer to my problems. So all of a sudden, I'm consuming all of these different courses and tactics and strategies. I'm doing a million different things. I'm doing none of them well. My anxiety is getting worse and worse by the day. I'm working around the clock, weekends, nights, everything. Like I am a hot mess, and to the point where I thought I need to get outside. So I put my AirPods in, I start listening to podcasts, and I go for my walk. And I'm listening to this podcast about how to use a framework to organize your thoughts. The context was around business, but you could use this literally in any area of your life. And it was the lifesaver that I needed in the moment. Basically, just do a brain dump of everything that's consuming you, everything that needs to be done or that you think needs to be done, and giving you this feeling of overwhelm or the thought spiral. And if you're anything like me, this is a very, very long list. But you write out this list, and for every single item, ask yourself the question, is this a problem that needs to be solved, or is it a shiny object or distraction that's trying to take me away from the discomfort of the problem? So immediately when I heard that idea, I pulled out my voice recorder and I just start like listing out everything that's in my brain. And when I got home, I copy and pasted my recording into AI and asked it to organize it into a list. Then I went through the list and marked off what was a problem versus a distraction. And when I finished it, I was actually really surprised at how few actual problems I had versus all of the shiny distractions that I had on this list. And at its core, what I realized was that my brain was freaking out because I didn't have a plan. I had made assumptions about how my business was doing, but really because I was on vacation, I had not caught up on all of my data tracking. So there was a story going on in my head that my business was on the decline and I was freaking out. And I also had this realization that I wasn't being realistic about how much I could get done in a certain amount of time. And at the end of the day, I realized that my brain was really just freaking out because it didn't believe that I had the know-how or skills to get myself out of this perceived problem that it thought I had. And then when I looked at the shiny objects, it was all, again, courses and books and listen to this podcast and take notes on this YouTube video, assuming that somewhere out in the ether is the answer to my problem, which is why I have a tendency to spin into consumption mode whenever I overthink things. So now that I knew what my problem was, it was very clear what the next step was going to be. I had to catch up on tracking all of my numbers so I could see if my business was actually declining or whether that was just a story I was telling myself. And the reality is that October ended up being a good month, but for different reasons. So some lines of revenue were declining and some were going up. And that was just something that I needed to reconcile and make a plan around. But here's the thing, because I was looking at data rather than just going with the story I had in my head, I was able to remove myself from the panic that was happening in my brain and create a plan forward. Now, I'm not going to say that I've completely clarified my Q4, even though we're halfway through it, and I still don't know what next year is going to look like. But what I have done is extract myself from that thought tornado, give myself a structure to think clearly, and actually create some next steps. And that is where I find myself in my business right now. So granted, I don't have all of the answers. And the reality is when you're in business, you never have all the answers, but at least I am no longer swirling in chaos, which is a really bad place to be when you have to be productive and actually do some problem solving. So that is the framework that I found so incredibly helpful. Once again, just brain dump everything that's going on in your brain and then go through that list and identify what is a problem that needs to be solved that I might be avoiding, what are problems that I don't need to address right now, and what are the shiny objects that my brain is trying to distract me with because it doesn't think I can actually solve my own problems, which is absolutely wrong because you can solve your own problems as soon as you're clear on what the problem actually is. So that is what I've got for you today, guys. If you're in a head spin, I hope you find that framework helpful. And on that note, I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.